who's just come in from my team, and maybe Ishita might come in, but we'll see.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I know so I just wanted to say Drisha's sent a message here, but she's just she's in the same room with Komal, so she'll wave out.
Okay. Hi.
Yeah, thank you. That's wonderful, and we're so thrilled to have you here. Hello, Divya, and we're excited to have you join us too. And if we're ready, I shall get us get us started. And Anna's gonna lead the conversation together with several of the young people we have here. And I'll just start by conveying a very warm welcome to you, Heeta. Heeta is very much a part of the POP family. She's at the heart of it. As we got started, Heeta was pivotal to making a lot of things happen. And so we're so happy to be back with you, Heeta. Thank you. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone who joins us here to the POP Leadership conversations. These are focused on climate issues and are a tribute to our chief mentor. This project aims to strengthen youth leadership and also explore tactics that empower the youth to take action, tackling the most pressing environmental issues that we face globally. We are conducting a series of conversations on leadership strategies, recommendations, reflections, and examples, each focused on global leadership and a different pressing environmental issue. This initiative is designed and implemented as a tribute to our chief mentor, late Dr. R.K. Pachauri. Today, we have the great pleasure of speaking with Heeta, who's been very pivotal, as I mentioned, to starting and launching the POP movement as a youth mentor. And she'll talk to us about her work and her experiences and reflect on her leadership as she works hard to make change makers that change the course of history. So I just want to say a very warm welcome to Heeta. Thank you once again for joining us. And I'm delighted to have you together with the rest of the POP family here. And I'll hand over to Anna, who will take it away from here. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Ash, and thank you so much, Heeta, for being here with us. I will now go ahead and introduce you, our guest speaker, to the rest of the people who are here with us. Heeta is a climate educator and founded the Climate Act Foundation. She has a Master's of Science in Environmental Studies and Research Management from Terry University in India. She's a firm believer in the power of youth participation in grassroots and international processes and strives to create change makers who combat the climate crisis with knowledge-based action. Heeta was introduced to the world of the United Nations climate change process at COP21 in 2015 and was the global focal point for Youngo for 2020 and 2021. She also works on training the youth to be effective negotiators in the UN intergovernmental processes through the Youth Negotiators Academy. I really like everything you're doing, so I'm very, very excited about this conversation. I would like to hand it over back to Dr. Ash, who will be helping us with the first question.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. Indeed, I just want to say that I think Heeta brings a brilliant mix of experiences, the many hats she wears, has worn, will continue to. So, you know, with this very eclectic background, and Heeta, you've sort of got an interesting blend because you've done so much grassroots and you continue to. I know you are passionate about going to schools, working hands-on with so many young people. And yet on the other end, you've done so much high-level policy work. You know, you're mentoring people in the negotiation processes as well. I'd love to know what, through this incredible experience that you bring with you, what leadership means to you. What then, in your mind, would constitute leadership, please?
Thank you so much for this question. I think it's a lovely question. But before I jump into that, thank you so much for having me here today. It's an absolute pleasure and very, very grateful to be having this conversation. Coincidentally, in India, also happens to be Guru Purnima, which is very loosely translated as your teacher's day. And I wouldn't have been here without my first mentor, Dr. Pachori. So it's definitely very special to be having this conversation on this particular day with, just to be here with the Pop family. So thank you so much for having me. Coming to your question on leadership, I think leadership for me means many different things. To ensure so if you want to lead, whether it's a team, whatever that might be, right? Whether it's a team of young people, a team of diverse groups, through the years or through the experiences that I've had the opportunity to work with different types of people from all over the world. So for me, it first went through a lot of really unlearning cultural biases, trying to understand, different countries, trying to just actually put countries on the map and trying to visualize where it is. When I heard of, young people coming from Tuvalu versus somewhere else, and I was just like, okay, now I need to put this in my map so I understand where this is. So right from basic geographics to trying to understand through language barriers, through cultural barriers, something might mean one thing in one culture, but something very different in another culture. So all of these different kinds of experiences really helped me grow, really helped me. I think it was a very steep learning curve, but I think it was a very necessary learning curve, just to be able to function in such a diverse and such an international space. And then, of course, comes the technical knowledge or basically the knowledge on whatever issue you might want to be working in. And for me, that eventually happened to be the UN climate change space. And while that, again, was a whole different learning curve, because that world is always a world of itself, like most of you might know. It's very hard for someone from the outside to just understand what's going on. Actually, even being inside, it's really hard to understand what's going on. So it really needs a translation of sorts to understand what, even though the language is English, to just try and figure out what they're saying, to make sense of it, and to put into, to sort of even, conceive the scale of the implications of certain, decisions, certain policies, which in itself, I think takes, at least it took me a while, but I think in general, it would take a lot of time if you've not received the necessary training, if you've not had the sort of hand-holding that sometimes is required in spaces like this. But I think in a nutshell, I think leadership would definitely just mean to try and understand the problem from somebody else's point of view. Try and see how would they look at it. If you were in their shoes, how would you approach a certain issue? And how would you like to have, what would you like to receive when you're working, or if you were in that situation? So if you would not like to be treated in a certain manner, it would make sense that you should not treat somebody else in the same manner. Or if you would like to be treated in a particular manner, if you would like to receive guidance, or if you would like to receive more capacity building, it probably might help to ensure that you can give that capacity building, maybe not yourself, but maybe like make the connections, maybe enable that capacity building through somebody else who could be more knowledgeable in this sphere. So I think the first and foremost to me would be just to try and look at the issue from somebody else's shoes, and then see how can we sort of take it forward. And then the other side of things would be to also look a few steps ahead. So try and imagine consequences of what decisions might look like. So if you do decide on a particular thing, look at different scenarios and how it might map out, at least over the next few months, if not over the next few years. And to try and see what are the different scenarios, what could possibly happen, and what might or might not go wrong. So that way you might already look and seeing if there are any risks coming, if you can mitigate certain risks well in advance, or at least keep your eye out for certain risks, if not mitigate them. So you're well prepared to dealing with certain things. Of course, sometimes a lot of things happen unexpectedly and beyond what you might be able to control, but at least it gives you an idea of looking at things in a different manner, trying and seeing if you can solve problems from different issues. And I think the final is really being open to learning. I think the key to being a good leader is always to be open to learn. I don't think I've reached a point where I feel like, okay, now I know it all and I can, could put my feet up and relax. So there's always going to be something that we're not aware of, certain, whether it's just a skill on how you do something, or maybe whether it's a subject matter knowledge or whatever that might be, or just handling certain scenarios. How would you deal in a certain crisis, for example? I'm sure there's somebody who can work well in crisis. Some people work well in pressure. Some people work well alone. Some people need to be in teams to work together. So I think all of these different scenarios, if you can try and understand and be open to learning new things, that really helps in ensuring that you can do better yourself, but also lead a team better with you.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I just want to say, Heeta, the diversity that you deal with in your work and your experience and the experiences you bring to the table really come to the fore as you described it. What leadership encapsulates in your mind, and I think that each of the points you have highlighted in some form or fashion do allude to that diversity. And you're right. I mean, you're of course you're at the center of this very of a global community, and yet you sit in a place like India, physically at the moment, and we know that there's so much diversity even in one in one country, in one nation, right? And so I just want to say that having that perspective is so key, because irrespective of the precise definition and nature of the groups we work with, embracing and respecting that diversity, be it of individual choices in terms of the way you work, like you described, or the way that you think, or the experiences you bring, or the context in which you've grown up and your lived experiences have panned out. I think it's just so keen and so important. And you also brought up the point about the fact that we continue to learn, and as a good leader, your mind and your heart is always open to these experiences, and you pick up what you have to, and then you move ahead. You take what is important and you learn what you need to, and then you're more of what you were than the day before. So I just love that, and needless to say, want to continue the conversation with you in terms of all the many amazing things I know that you've been a part of making happen over the last several years. And I hope that the rest of the Pop family can also learn from that important wisdom you bring to the fore. So I just want to say thank you for sharing that, and how special it is that we should be together today. I just want to say thank you for sharing that, and we're so humbled and honored. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heeta. I completely agree with everything you said regarding leadership. And I think you really put it in a different perspective, right? About learning from others and really being in that way the leader that they need, and not just the leader that you think you can be, which I think is very, very interesting. I would now like to hand it over to Ale, who will help us with the next question.
Hello, Dinar. I love your Heeta. I want to ask, how do you create Changemakers through your work? And also, what are the biggest challenges that prevent the youth from creating Changemakers?
I think to answer first the challenge, I think sometimes I think that the biggest challenge is just the lack of knowing that you can be a change maker. It's just the fact that you feel that I'm one person. What can one person do? And I think if we can just open opportunities, if we can just make it more available for especially young people, but not only young people, I think this is across generations, but especially young people, if you can just make it or make certain access to opportunities more available, access to information that you can do certain things, just giving examples of change that have been led by, one person somewhere saw something wrong and then it created into a whole different change, whether it was an innovation, whether it was a movement, whatever that looks like. And very often, I think we underestimate ourselves. We feel like, this is not something that I can deal with. Or sometimes it just so happens that we're so busy with so many other things in life that we feel like, oh, I don't have the time to deal with this problem. Because if I have to get into this, I have to give up 3 other things that I probably am doing today. So it's a mix of different things that might be inhibiting somebody. But I think the very basic sometimes is just the lack of access and the willingness to be like, okay, maybe I can create the change myself. Because we're always waiting for someone else to create change, whether it is, whatever it may be, whether it is a government, whether it's a policy, whether it is my neighbor, whether it's my parent, my sister, whatever that might look like. And very often we forget that we could actually be that someone else creating the change. So I think this is the very first barrier. But then, of course, when you look at it from a different, from a more in-depth lens, it really depends. There's access to resources sometimes, which is very, very limited. So even if you do want to create something, you do want to start something, work on, let's just say, reduce waste from my community. Just access of, lack of access of what can be done, lack of, willingness to change. There are then a whole lot of different issues which then come. A lot of the times funding can be an issue. If you're just starting up, you don't know where to get the sort of right funding for certain technologies, for certain ideas, just for certain, very basic tools that you might be needing. So then, of course, there are lots of different barriers that possibly might come, and this might depend on person to person, on what you're doing, where you're based. Of course, generally speaking, also, it's a lot more harder if you're from a developing country or if you're from the global south. There are lot of different issues that you need to deal with on a day-to-day scale, rather than looking at climate or environment on a more holistic lens. There are more real issues that come that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But of course, I think there are ways to overcome challenges. People have shown it over and over again that from the deepest and darkest of places and deepest and darkest of times, we've found people who've come up and overcome issues. So there are, of course, I think if you have the right access to the right mentorship, I think is very, very important. Someone who can guide you and sort of hold your hand through it all. It need not, have to be doing the work with you. You could be doing it alone, but as long as you have someone who you can share your thoughts with, share your ideas with, maybe just brainstorm, definitely helps. At least would definitely help me a lot to sort of come up with new things and look at it from a different approach as well. Sometimes you're just so engrossed in the issue that you forget that there's a whole different lens that you can approach a problem from. And I think this is possibly what I'm also trying to do through the work that we do, is really see how can we build capacity of young people, whether it is just capacity to take action or whether it is capacity to create change at an international level, no matter what that means. It's just, how do you build capacity of young people to ensure that we can make this fight for the climate crisis, make it a lot more stronger, make it a lot more efficient, without having to get overwhelmed and, feel like, yeah, this is something that's not going to change, or, there's no point doing this anymore because things are just not moving. And of course, there are going to be ups and downs, but the idea is just that having a community, having people that you can, work with might really help. So really creating a space for dialogue, creating a space for community. And then also trying and providing the right tools, right? So I've been working through education, which I think for me is key to ensure, just first give them the knowledge to be able to work and to take action, and then see how we can channel this through action. So from knowledge to action is what we're looking at. And that is a sort of, I think, the area that I have chosen to work on, but it doesn't matter what field you work in. At the end of the day, I think it's just trying to look at problems from different scenarios, trying to find and create a space which is a safe space for learning, a safe space for asking questions, and really also critiquing one another and saying, I don't think this might really be the right approach, but without having to, feel or making someone offended or even getting offended yourself.
I love your
Thank you
answer. I
so
think
much.
that I love your answer. I think that every word that you say is extremely important and true. And I really just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you, Ali. That was a great question. And thank you, Hita, for the amazing answer. I think you really put into perspective that there are some challenges, but we can overcome them to create positive action. I would now like to hand it over to Komal for the next question.
Thank you, Anna. Hi, Heeta. So, as we know that our future is at stake because of all the climate decisions that are being made by the stakeholders. So, my question to you is that as a young person, or how can we involve young people in taking the climate decisions, or to be the part of that decision making process more actively?
So I think the first is really to try and break down what is happening behind these rooms, right? It is like when I started, I mentioned it is a world of itself. When I went to my first COP, I was just, okay, this is great, but I don't think I'm ever coming back here again because I had absolutely no clue what was going on. So it is very, very overwhelming, especially the international space, the UN. But it is also, I mean, sometimes I think it's just the design of it, where the whole process is sometimes just comes off to be so intransparent that you really have to be in the thick of things to understand what's happening. And despite all of that, at the end of the day, it's a very political scenario. So there are changes, geopolitical scenarios, geopolitical, how do you say, liaisons that are happening behind the scenes that sometimes you're not aware of, even if you're there in the midst of it all. So it is very hard to know, like, to understand every single thing and feel like, okay, now I know what's going on. But I think you don't need to know every single thing to also make a change. So the first is really like trying to demystify what is really happening, trying to bridge the gap between what are these conversations, what does that sort of technicality look like, what are the words such as, I don't know, SEF, PCCB, CTCN, all kinds of jargon that is used in the negotiations, just trying to make it into a more understandable language. And then, of course, the other side is to realize that to be able to make change, we don't necessarily need to be involved in policy making. There are different things that each person can do. One is to just, if you're, for example, interested in communications, you could try and just communicate to people outside, bring this knowledge to the world outside on what is happening when you go to such a conference, or what can somebody do if you're not there at a conference, what are the different ways of engaging. If you're interested in, I don't know, say advocacy, there could be a lot of bottom-up advocacy that you can already do beforehand, because the decisions for, or sort of the base for these sort of negotiations are already made months in advance. So to try and understand how the process works, to see where you need to lobby. So if you want effect, say, for example, at COP27, we need to start working now. Because if we wait to go to Egypt and make a difference at COP27, it's too late. Country positions are already set by then. So really having that sort of space to first the opportunity to understand, where you can fit best, and then to see what you like within the area. Where does your passion lie? Where does your area of expertise or your area of interest lie? And then try and sort of make those connections. Some people are really good at building networks and making these matches. So if you know that, there's a lack in a certain area, if you know somebody who can fill that gap, they're really good at sort of, building these bridges, making connections. Somebody might be really good at mobilizing a lot of young people, creating that sort of noise, creating the traction that we need beforehand. So we need all sorts of things when it comes to creating change internationally. We don't have to necessarily, it would be great to be there making those decisions, but we don't need to be there to create the change. We just need to ensure that we're creating the right amount of push and the traction so that people who are there currently can make those changes and are forced to make those changes at some level.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heeta. That was as always, a very, very interesting and important response to Kamal's great question. I would now like to hand it over to Sam. I don't know if he can hear us. He has the next question, but let's see if he can ask it.
Please, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Perfect. Thank you, Sam.
I don't know if, because where I am currently, actually on the road. So, okay, so let me just ask my question since you can hear me. If not, I would just be like, okay. And then thank you, Heeta, for those wonderful sections and wonderful answers you gave to those questions. They're really awesome. And also, I'm really, really glad to hear about what Shingo is doing, especially to promote a whole lot of youth engagement in climate actions and activism. So my question is, what role does Yunga play in bringing together the youth across the globe for coordinated and effective action? What role do they play to bring youth around the globe for coordinated and effective action? Because Yungo is the youth wing for UNFCCC when it comes to climate change activism and advocacy. So thank you.
Thank you for that question, Sam. So Yango is, like you already mentioned, is basically the mandated mechanism. So it's a mechanism within the UN climate change framework to engage with children and young people. So we're not an organization, but it's basically a network of young people from across the world, entirely volunteer-based, that are interested within or are interested about the UN climate change process at varying levels. So currently, I think the membership is pretty large. It's about close to about 10,000 individuals and from 170 plus countries and 1,000 plus organizations or youth-led entities that are part of our network. And the way that Yango works is basically through its working groups. So there are about more than 20 working groups currently focusing on different topics. Some of them very closely related to the UNFCCC negotiations. So very focused, for example, on adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage, finance, technology, action for climate empowerment, gender. But there are also quite a few cross-cutting working groups, say, for example, human rights, science, indigenous peoples, whatever that might look like. So they're close to about 20 working groups which look at various different topics, right from, like I said, the thematic negotiation-based topics to certain topics which young people might be interested in, but don't necessarily have a negotiation topic under the UNFCCC. And say that there is still another working group that you feel that has not been covered through these 20 plus working groups. We've also had quite a few new working groups come up over the last year, one on water, there's been another one on trying to reduce inequalities. So there are all kinds of different working groups, whether it's focusing on, more like negotiation-based thematic stuff or more youth climate, young people interest-focused kind of working groups. And this is basically where most of the work happens. So this is basically where you can engage. You can, of course, feel free to join more than one working group. If you want, you can join as many as you like, but it would also make sense to stay focused and not go too far, because then it's also very confusing and it can get very overwhelming with lots of things happening. So maybe picking a couple that you feel are most are of most interest to you. But of course, you can always move through working groups. You don't necessarily have to pick one and get stuck for life. So you can always pick and choose what you like. If you have an interest in something else, you can always, see what's going on. So this is mainly the sort of the arm that engages, that is most active. Some working groups, of course, are more active than the others, but because it's a volunteer-based, network, it dips up and down in engagement, but it also sometimes is nice to know, because if there is something which is not very active and if you're interested, it's also very bottom up and you can sort of just get the movement going yourself and, start something which has been dormant for a while. And then, of course, because Yango is the mandated mechanism, is the youth constituency, there are representation opportunities that come to the constituency. So sometimes to have representatives in certain meetings, whether it is UN, at the negotiations like COPs or the intercessions, but whether it is something that might be happening remotely. Some of its constituted bodies, for example, there is Standing Committee for Finance, for example, that might be having a meeting and can have representatives from Yango or on technology or on something else. So there are invitations given for Yango members to attend. So there are certain people that can go in, they can speak. Yango can have a position, so you can always help in drafting what the statement might look like, so on and so forth. And then, of course, there's a more admin team that does a lot of behind the scenes sort of coordination, selection for representatives at such meetings, so on and so forth, which is the global coordination team. Just ensures that the constituency is functioning, day-to-day activities are going on. And then there are the 2 focal points that are elected at every COP. So I was elected at COP25, started my mandate in January 2020 and finished it after COP26. Now we've had 2 new focal points that were elected at COP and started earlier this year. So that's usually how the constituency functions. It's open to anyone under the age of 35. So that's literally the only one criteria, and there's no membership fee. There's a very simple sign-up form, which I can also share here in the chat, and you can share it with your networks. And it's just very easy to join.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heeta. I think the work you have been doing through Yango and the work that Yango does is so important and so interesting. So thank you for telling us more about how it works. And for the last question, I would like to hand it over to Mira for her to ask.
Thank you so much, Anna. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you for this great opportunity, having a chance to have such a great conversation with Heeta. It's really insightful. I'll go straight away to ask my question. How can high-level decision makers at companies or governments create changes in their institutions to make sure the youth's demands are taken into account?
Thank you so much. I think that's a lovely question. So I think one is just to have a little more open mindset, to be willing to, listen to somebody who's not necessarily part of the system, who's not necessarily been there for the past 20 years, 50 years, who doesn't know everything, so to say. But also understanding that there are different approaches, basically. One is just an open-mindedness, but the reason why you should have an open mind comes from different reasons. One is the whole intergenerational aspect, right? It is decisions that are made today are affecting the future and the lives of young people. So imperatively, I think their views should be taken into account when these decisions are made. There's also a whole different idea of, maybe for countries or even for corporations to have succession planning. It could be a really good strategy to engage with young people, to sort of see what they want, to get them, or sort of also break down their internal decision-making policies, break down why it takes long for certain decisions to be made, or what are the sort of processes that go underway, which might possibly have more young people to be more interested in getting into politics, for example, or getting into corporate structures without having to say that, okay, corporates are bad, I will not work in a corporate environment, or governments are, impossible to make change, or politics is always corrupted. So it might help to sort of also create succession planning for their companies or for governments also, which usually is not really taken into account. And finally, I think just having a more intergenerational approach or intergenerational dialogue also really helps in different views, different kinds of approaches to certain things, because just a generation gap in itself helps look at certain issues in a different manner, which you might also see in your household, certain things that you or your family or your parents or grandparents think versus how you might think might be very different. So if there is space for conversation, there is space for dialogue, it can lead to, I think, a really interesting mix of how problems can be solved, and at least problems can be looked at from a different perspective. So I think the biggest issue here is just the mindset, is to really open mindsets and to say that, okay, maybe we're going to give it a try. It might work, it might not work. There might be different tweaks needed across the process to see how to find the best fit. Of course, not saying that the first time you try it's going to magically click and the world is going to change. But I think it's just the willingness to change, the willingness to see that, okay, we possibly do need diverse perspectives on the team. Or like we do need voices, not just from young people, but from young people, from people who are actually facing the impacts of decisions, maybe from vulnerable communities, maybe from young people from different genders, from different backgrounds, maybe from indigenous communities, whatever that might look like. So I think that is the first thing, but also I think is also how we sort of approach it. Maybe just if we can also look at approaching problems in a different manner. If we're looking for, if we're looking to working with a particular, whether it's a company or a government or whatever, I think understanding the problems is key, but coming up with solutions is a little bit more important. I cannot remember what I was listening to, someone I was speaking with recently, and they said, young people come up with a lot of the things that this is not all right, this is that, we need to change it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But they don't come up with what can we do to change 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it just feels like young people are protesting on the streets, which is true. And I think we need to do both. We definitely need to highlight problems because sometimes we're just not seeing them, even though they're in our face every single day. But I think we also need to start thinking of solutions ourselves and proposing solutions. Because the moment you can propose, even if it's not the right solution, that's fine. The moment you bring a proposal to the table, they're probably more likely to listen to you. Unless rather than just going and saying, we want to change 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in your company, but we want to change 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we have 5 ideas on how we can change that. I think might be a first step forward as well.
Thank you so much for that amazing response. So from your point of view, whereby you talked about open-mindedness, I feel like it's not just about the young people who are to be open-minded, but as well, I feel like the government officials and stakeholders involved for youth inclusiveness and participation in these programs ought to be open-minded as well.
Absolutely.
Because if you get a fixated group of, let's say, teachers, government officials who have this kind of thing that youth are young, energetic, and time wasters existing in the globe, you won't be able to channel their energy into some kind of direction. And then about the intergenerational dialogues, that's a really smart idea. And the thing is as well, the open-mindedness is key. If someone is underestimating the potential or energy in someone, there is no way they'll be able to sit down and have such an insightful conversation with a young person to make them realize then how exactly they are going to propose ideas that would help a situation. So I think that's why you'd find most young people rather making noise about problems and failing to find solutions because they haven't been empowered enough by the people who are in charge of putting this energy and guidance into them. So yes, I would really like to appreciate you for this great conversation. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heeta and Mida, for that great question. I would now like to hand it over to Dr. Ash for the conclusions.
Thank you. I think it's been a phenomenal conversation, and I want to thank Heeta and everybody else for presenting these questions, which sort of triggered a lot of thinking about this. And I was wondering, before we close, Heeta, if we could seek your insight on a couple more things, because I'm just it triggered some thinking here. You brought up the point and about the fact that going into a discussion with possible solutions to address issues is a very much more constructive way of handling challenges, but also in terms of being able to present a proposal which is more positive than sort of talking about issues without any clear direction for it. And in our experience, we found in several instances, people have, in fact, talked about the issue of climate change, where it's a challenge, but then they don't quite understand it. And so it comes across, it is a challenge, but we don't quite know what it is. We don't know what to do about it. And you talked about education being key And I couldn't agree more. It is indeed a very key part of being able to inform young people, support productive conversations. And you talked about an important thing, which is that as we go into a COP, the real work that happens is pre-COP and building up the momentum to the directions we need to take and adopt, the quote unquote, the pressures that need to be built up in order to create that change have to happen in the build up to a COP. And I was wondering if you might be able to throw a little more light on some of the examples through your own work of what you might have done that have successfully resulted in negotiations as a consequence of that background work. I know there are a lot of people here who are interested in learning from that experience. So I was wondering if you could throw light on that a little bit, please. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of my work, of course, has been through the youth constituency, especially the last couple of years as focal point. So through Youngo, I think there's been a lot of different kind of things that we've done and a few things that I've also been part of. One that I've seen is really effective have been the working groups, especially because this is something that goes on throughout the year. So there are people who are constantly, even whether it's at negotiations, but even after that, looking at, in the negotiations, there's somebody or the other from the working group who's in there, especially in the rooms that they're allowed to, like, that are open, they're allowed to go into, following what's going on, taking notes, and there's debriefing. The working group meets during sessions. They coordinate activities. Things are moving on a day-to-day basis, and they change very, very fast at a COP. So they're really keeping that speed, and you're looking over on what's going on, thinking on your toes as well. If you've seen something and you feel like, okay, this is one thing that we can sort of influence, going up to negotiators, speaking with them. And given the fact that now Youngo has been in this space for a while and has shown credibility, it has also created this sort of confidence among some negotiators, or at least most countries, or if not confidence, at least some sort of, this is a credible or sort of group of young people. It's not just somebody walking, who's asking me random questions, which has helped because then they assume that you come with a certain amount of background, you come with a certain amount of understanding of the space, which makes it important for us to ensure that the young people who are going there have that sort of understanding of the space. And is, again, is not just walking in there and then, doesn't know what they're asking, and is, that, because you get a few moments with these negotiators. If you're catching them walking down the corridor, they're probably running from one meeting to the next. And if you have those 2 minutes and you don't utilize those 2 minutes well enough, it's a lost opportunity. But if you do it well, you could possibly get another meeting for coffee the next day, or, a little later. So sometimes I think it's also very, or at least what I've seen is really true, because there is a continuous process, because there are different working groups. It need not be the same people, but there's historical knowledge that is passed on through these groups. It has helped in create change. For example, one of the most, easiest to create change for somehow has been the Action for Climate Empowerment track within the negotiations. It basically focuses on education, capacity building, training, so on and so forth. Is also happens to be the most youth-friendly track, where negotiators are also very open to working with young people, are open to getting inputs from young people, have meetings with Youngo even, on an ad hoc basis previously if required. So they're very open to also receiving feedback. And, I think there's also been a few years of sort of having that sort of interaction, which has created that openness. Certain more contentious topics, like, for example, finance, has always been harder to break into. And the idea that, you're a young person, go deal with the education space, don't come into finance. This is for more technical people to deal with. So I think just, having, one has just been to see how the space has been evolving over time. There have been smaller wins that have come through, like I was mentioning, for example, through the AS, we've seen how young people are being recognized. If there are positions that, we've also seen actually young people recommend, for example, in the draft text, language that they might want to be incorporated, and more or less There are certain things that have been incorporated through that. There are also certain outcomes that have ensured that now even the negotiators themselves are talking about having young people involved in these outcomes that, or sort of the language that goes in, making more youth-friendly language. So these are wins that we've definitely seen. There are also certain very, like for example, certain things have taken much longer. At COP26, there was another small win, which was within the technology negotiations. There's a CTCN, which is the Climate Technologies Center Network, which basically focuses on different technological, involvements within the UNFCCC. And they have an advisory board which had a few different stakeholders, a few different observer constituencies that were part, but there were 3 constituencies: youth, indigenous people, and women and gender, that were not a part of this advisory board. And there'd been years of actually, back and forth asking for this seat in the advisory board that went on. And it took about 4 years to finally get the in, which happened at COP26. The 3 constituencies got a seat each, which was, I think, another small win to really see that, we're now getting into these sort of spaces, getting these seats in the advisory board, which is opening up avenues for young people to engage in. But of course, it wasn't easy. I mean, even at COP26, there were lots of different countries that had different viewpoints, and some were just as simple as, you don't need to be in the advisory board to make change. You can always come and speak with us. But then that also means that, there are just different ways of saying, okay, you probably don't need to be here, and you can deal with other stuff, which is non-essential, so to say. So I think there are there are small wins that sort of we look to in these negotiations. There are much larger things that we're still looking for, which hasn't happened. For example, really advocating for the climate finance required for countries to adapt and deal with the impacts of climate change. But there are certain smaller things that come across the way. So I think through through my work, I think what we've really seen is how do you best ensure, to understand who to reach out to, who might be your best ally to take certain, because we're observers to the framework. So we're not there negotiating, we're not there making those decisions, even if we're in the space. So really knowing which country or which sort of group might be a good ally to bring in certain points, understanding red lines, that has really helped in ensuring that you can really bring in points where necessary. Or finding certain loopholes, also finding that, there's a little bit of gray area. How can you turn that into an opportunity rather than just, letting it pass by? Which requires engagement, which requires understanding of the space. So really, it's a mix of demystifying the process, but also trying to ensure that there is continuity over the years to keep this happening.
That's really phenomenal. And, I appreciate very much your experience where you've highlighted a very important thing, which is that it may not be a gigantic leap. And yes, we have a window of opportunity. We do need to make those leaps, and they're crucial. But then there's also the smaller gains that we make in the process, and it's important to recognize them. And sometimes it's the smaller ones also that help build up to the bigger ones, right? Because as you talked about, there's the issue of credibility. It's the seat on the table. There's a number of things. And also in your example, our conversation started with the question about what is leadership from your perspective, and you talked about the importance of being able to say what you have to in a 30-second capsule, which might open the door. You get your foot in the door and opens the door to a larger conversation going forward. But therein lies the magic, right? Of being able to communicate effectively, know exactly what you want to say. And that's yet another element of leadership. So I just want to say, Heeta, this has been such a beautiful conversation, so insightful, filled and brimming with a lot of real practical insight. And I, for everybody who's here, want to say that Heeta is also playing a critical and pivotal role right now in terms of building capacities of young people in these processes, to understand what it takes, what that experience has taught her, how she can take away what she has gained through the years of experience. So more young people are capacitated with the tools, the wherewithal, the knowledge, the insights to be successful in negotiation processes. So I just want to say, we want to thank you very much for keeping focus on that capacity building, the whole idea of being inspired by knowledge. And also, you've brought up on multiple occasions the importance of intergenerational dialogue and inclusiveness. You talked about many different kinds of stakeholders. You talked about different people from places and spaces, from people on the gender spectrum, indigenous communities, a lot of things. And I think that, as we have a chance to ponder on the many important experiences you've shared in the last 50 plus minutes, I think there's a lot for all of us to take away and to love and respect in our work and the opportunity that lies ahead for all of us as a global family. So I just want to say thank you for flagging these important things, keeping that room in one's heart open to look at things from diverse perspectives. There are always those different lenses, and as long as we're open to understanding that there's many different types of people and many types that make up the world, we'll keep our minds and hearts open to the various perspectives. And in that will lie the heart of keeping conversations open with different generations, different people, different geographies. So we'd love, Heeta, to take forward the conversation about working with you to help make, serve as a bridge between you and the many young people, I think, who gain from your experience. And this conversation is one step in that direction, but I hope we'll be able to help bring you together with the young people who I think will continue to be inspired by you and your experiences, and help you share your wisdom and knowledge as you go ahead. So I want to say thank you for being a very precious part of the Bob family, for giving us the good fortune of celebrating being together with you today, and to all that lies in store for us together. So I just wish to convey my gratitude to the amazing young people in the room, to each one of you from, I know, many different geographies who've joined us, who've asked very thoughtful questions, and to Heeta for taking the time and really sort of thinking profoundly about what those lessons are that we can take away, learn from, and be more together. So with that, my love and gratitude, and I hope we can get a picture too before we leave, which we'll share with you, Heeta, and also a link to this conversation, which will be made available online, but we'd love for you to be able to have access to it too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure, and thank you for the lovely questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Heeta. Thank you, Anna, Komal, Trisha, Sam, Meda, Ale, and a few people who've left because they needed to take off early. But thank you all so much. And if you can get our cameras on for those who can, let's get a screenshot. And here we go. I know Sam probably can't, so here goes. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you very much. And have a blessed and beautiful day and evening. And we look forward to following up with you on more opportunities to come together. Thank you for everything.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Heeta. It was so great listening to you, and thank you for answering all of these questions. I think you really inspired all of us to really go into a higher level to solve issues. I think it was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. See you soon, everybody.
Bye.
God
See you.
bless
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Heeta. Bye.